Let's go back to CNBC senior markets correspondent Dom Chu and Jason Furman, a former top economic advisor to President Obama and an economic policy professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. Also, Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley joining us, NBC's Morgan Chesky in Hidalgo, Texas, because we did hear the president not only being asked about the economy, but also being asked about the border wall, again saying that it was appropriated by Congress. He doesn't have a line item veto. He couldn't veto it. He tried to use it for more border agents, and he could not. Congress refused to let him use it for anything but the wall. That does fly into the face of what certainly the Homeland Security Secretary said, Morgan Chesky, just yesterday or in the filing the night before last, which was that this is in response to an uptick, the flow of migration, illegal and otherwise. Morgan?
Yeah, Andrea, you're exactly right. And we're here in Starr County. This is where that proposed about 20-mile section of a border barrier or border wall would be built with those funds that the president pointed out were appropriated back in 2019 under a Republican Congress with President Trump then in office. And we're expecting to speak to the county judge here, where we anticipate hearing essentially that this may help, but there is no firm timeline, Andrea, on when this section of wall would actually go into place. And we've already heard from local critics here in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas who say that this is not a long-term solution, echoing some of what the president said, in that there needs to be more boots on the ground, more higher tech solutions, and not merely an extension of a wall that will only be a stopgap measure here. The numbers speak for themselves, Andrea. We know that in this section alone, the Rio Grande sector, Customs and Border Protection reported about 250,000 migrants trying to cross illegally over the last year. And for the people in this community, they are very much calling this a migrant crisis. And that is why when the president did say they're going to build 20 more miles of wall, going against what he said as a candidate when he said that they were not going to build an extra foot of wall, there is a little bit of curiosity here on this sharp reversal from the Biden administration, and people are curious to see how this plays out. Andrea?
And Julia, you were just in Chicago, where there in Illinois, a blue state, the governor's been upset because of the migrants going there, as well as New York and other places in the north.
That's right, Andrea. So we know that I just returned from Chicago, where there are a lot of city officials who are scrambling to find places to house migrants as well as feed them. In fact, I was just in a food bank yesterday where they're really feeling the ramifications of the border, right where Morgan is now. Here's what I learned from the food bank. Are you worried about being able to provide enough for this growing population?
Well, yeah, we don't know how long this is going to go on for. So that in itself is worrisome. But yeah, trying to make sure that we are able to source enough food to continue being able to provide. Yeah, that's on my mind all the time.
So, Andrea, if you're taking, what the president has just said about the border, trying to say that this is something that was planned all along, it's hard to take it out of the context when you have cities like Chicago, right, New York complaining about the influx. You're seeing record high numbers of migrants crossing the border. And the Secretary of Homeland Security said it himself yesterday in the Federal Register that because of this there's an acute need for a border wall, which is really a reversal, even though the Biden administration and certainly Biden himself are saying it's not a reversal, their hands were tied.
And, Julia, of course, another huge issue is the economy. So, Jason Furman, we had this, really blowout of a jobs report. And the president was there to point that out. He was asked why he's not getting credit for it, because the polls show that a very low number are giving him credit for having a good economy, something like 39%. And he said, I'm going to choose my words carefully. It's because you're not all happy people. So he's trying to gently say, we're not reporting it enough. Jason?
Yeah, I don't know what explains those numbers, but it is notable if you look at consumer sentiment, that has risen a lot in the last 6 months. And it's over that period of time that you've seen lower inflation and larger real wage gains. That hasn't been showing up in the president's approval rating on the economy, but I wouldn't be surprised if people, as they're getting more optimistic about sentiment, and as they continue to be optimistic with their wallets when they go into stores, that maybe some of that starts to show up in how they judge the president on these issues as well.
And Dom Chu, thanks for standing by. But if you could bring us all home on this, on the economy, half full, half empty. What about the politics of it? Take it any way you want.
So I would echo a little bit of what Jason was mentioning here. There is this notion right now, and just from, having reported on it over the course of the past year, I would talk in cocktail conversations with folks about how Americans care a lot, I've learned, about egg prices, and they care about gasoline prices. There's also a primacy recency effect. People tend to remember the things that have just happened to them right now, and they tend to remember the things that happened to them that really got them going in the wrong direction in the first place. Fuel prices are going to be front and center right now. I mention that only because we have seen a sharp tick higher in fuel prices over the last several weeks. But just in the last few days or so, the last week or so, we've seen a very sharp drop-off in the price of crude oil, which could at some point translate into gasoline prices. So when the markets are pricing some of these things out, it really comes down to whether or not consumers start to feel the impact of it. They tend to focus on things like gasoline prices because maybe, to the president's point, when you drive down the road, walk down the street, you see a gas station, you see the bright sign out there showing you exactly how much regular unleaded costs. When you start to see it go higher markedly, it does weigh on sentiment. The true test, Andrea, will be whether or not in the coming 2 to 3 months, in the all-important retail holiday shopping season, the American consumer still goes out there, Andrea, and spends money. That's the big key.